Now, the reality is that there's a lot of religious voters, and Democrats, have an interesting challenge. Actually, when Democrats run for office, they often have to appeal to some of the least and most religious voters at the same time, because both of those sit within the Democratic Party.
Have you ever been in a black church? I mean,
exactly. I mean, there's only one active clergy member in the U.S. Senate, and it's
right.
Warnock,
Georgia.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so like that dynamic often gets obscured. And so what we see here is that, like, when they say that, although I will say, if it's the interview that you're referring to, they do a little more couching than they often do. Sometimes you'll hear people say that, this is the first White House faith office. That is not true. There has been a White House faith office for neighborhood-based partnerships that actually began under Bush, was continued throughout the Obama administration. And actually, the first Trump administration dismantled that office and then founded a new one that Paula White briefly led for the last year and a half of that administration. They've redone it. It is true that they moved it into the West Wing, and that but it's one, we actually don't entirely know the nature of the work of that office in terms of what they do day to day. But it does seem to be particularly reflective of conservative Christians in general and evangelical Christians in particular. There was some Catholic representation, for instance, at that Easter celebration, and they did mention, like some Jewish leaders with the Passover celebration as well. But disproportionately, Paula White, who runs that faith office, is herself an evangelical Christian pastor. And that posture, that position, and that faith group's particular interests not only disproportionately helped catapult Trump into power to begin with, but seem to be, many critics have argued, are disproportionately represented in the policy positions of this administration. Even if other faith groups have come out against them, it is notable, for instance, that when Trump posted that image of himself resembling Jesus, there were actually a number of critics, even within conservative evangelical spaces, that criticized him for that. But Franklin Graham, who spoke at that same Easter celebration, by the way, was one of his lone defenders in that space. And that is not surprising, given that that is part of the very specific group of evangelical folks that he has surrounded himself with since his first campaign for office.
And what form of defense did Franklin Graham offer to make that appalling, no matter what your faith is, insulting image okay?
So if I recall correctly, and trust but verify on this one, Franklin Graham's statement, which he sent to me as well, argues that, one, he doesn't think that Trump would willingly or knowingly depict himself as Jesus. And two, that when he saw the image, he did not see it as representing, like, he's like, I didn't see any crosses. I did not see it as an explicitly religious image. Now, it is true that if you look at that image, Trump's hands are glowing. There are people suspended in the sky above him. I, as a religion reporter, I will tell you that my first impression of looking at that is that it certainly seemed to resemble Jesus. And I don't know many doctors, because Trump said he thought it was a doctor whose hands glow upon administering medical procedures. But,
Right.
That was basically Franklin Graham's argument, is that he didn't think that it was an inherently religious image. Now, one of the first people to criticize Franklin Graham over that was former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I should note is a self-described Christian nationalist. And she posted an image of, like, the one that Trump had posted alongside an image of Jesus, and noted the visual and aesthetic similarities. And she actually called Franklin Graham out for that, saying that, I don't believe this, or I don't agree with this. So it's been interesting to see this interplay within Trump's own circles.
I was just, look, I'm a Jewish guy. I was disturbed by that image for a lot of reasons. Sean, do you have that image? If you do, can you put it up? There was something about it. It's clearly, as you say, glowing hand. The iconography feels very traditional. You can see Jesus in an iconography like that. But flying over his head are armed soldiers, are weapons of war. Right? You see U.S. military planes flying over his head. And whatever that monster is on the top, which I don't understand what that iconography is, but and this flag, I just think there is something about Trump's the administration's view of faith that is that carries through to the way he acts in every other way, which is coercion is it at its core. And that does not seem to be the message of any of the Christian tradition. So I thought it was blasphemous, just straight out as iconography. Very strange.
Yes, a couple of things there. One, I should note that the unclear being immediately above him with like either horns or like a demogorgon mouth. That what we do know is that there is an original version of this image that was shared in February that did not have that. So something or someone altered the image from the original to that. So I don't. There's not been. I have not seen reporting that has figured out when that was added or what it was supposed to be. But a couple different things here. One, that you're talking about the kind of the iconography, like the American flag, right? And taking, if as many critics have said that, if they say that this is an overtly religious image, the idea of conflating American iconography with religious iconography that is something that has appeared a lot in this administration and surrounding this administration. We've actually seen a couple of different agencies, the Department of Defense as well as the Department of Homeland Security, kind of invoke faith, and in particular Christian faith, alongside these images of weapons of war, what have you. I think there's one with Hegseth actually like reciting a Christian prayer as images of weapons of war flash in the background. On the one hand,
it's a real Christian prayer. It's not Quentin Tarantino.
Right. We can talk about that.
We will.
But there is, I think many critics have argued that this is evidential of Christian nationalism. Now, I think there are two things that are true there. One, it is true that there has been lots of instances in the American past of like religion in general, what is sometimes referred to as a civil religion, alongside images of American iconography. What critics allege is that the particular brand of Christian nationalism that has been embraced by some of the members of this administration has kind of amped that up to 11, and that it kind of really aligns. And I should note that it is absolutely the case that on the one hand, there are certain faith communities that have embraced this. There are certain things called patriot churches that kind of cropped up around in the aftermath of January 6th, actually. And then it is also true that there are many religious traditions who refer to this as blasphemy and heresy. And to make things even more complicated, Doug Wilson, who is the person who oversees the worship service that Hegseth himself attends, who is a self-described Christian nationalist, he referred to Trump's image as blasphemous in a statement to me and publicly. So there's a lot going on here all at the same time, in terms of, and I should note he's also very critical of Paula White, who was the person who was speaking in that video earlier. There's a whole intra-MAGA fight happening within MAGA Christianity, but that gets away from your original point, which is that iconography, that imagery has appeared a lot over the last 8 years in the various Trump administrations.